Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. So Colorado's got a massive budget shortfall. All right, who cares? But somebody's breaking into my car and stealing stuff, and that hacks me off. But what are we going to do about it? Colorado has a big problem because we're spending so much on law enforcement and what to do with civil justice. That is, do they stay in jail? What are the laws? There's been an interesting process going on to try to change that or to look at that. So Don Quick is from Weld County. You're the prosecutor up there.
Adams and Broomfield.
Adams, Broomfield. Adams, Broomfield. Anything north of it doesn't work. And Doug Wilson, you're the guy who does the free defense for everybody like me. So I want to get to know you very well because I'm sure I'm going to call you in the public defender's office at some point.
And we'll talk about your civil rights then.
Yeah, we'll do that. Talk to me a little bit about this process. It's happened behind closed doors. Give me an idea what the problem is before we talk about how this commission is trying to fix some of these problems.
Well, I think everybody recognizes we can do things better, more efficiently, provide better public safety and taxpayer dollars invested well. The problem is in a political process, those things are often decided in a hallway with 15 or 20 minutes to bend somebody's ear. And so the thought is...
Talking about the legislature, in other words, when it comes to the sentencing laws and what laws should be where, what level should be category this felony, category that misdemeanor, what the punishments should be. You know, traditionally it's some lobbyist in the hall of the legislative committee room, and they run in, they convince somebody, and off it goes, and then you have to deal with it.
That's correct. Or anecdotal legislative making, that when a constituent for somebody had this experience, and so this law is enacted to address that singular event. And the thought is, with the limited dollars we have, can we bring people together, the state public defender, district attorneys, judges, anybody else involved in the justice system, and say, can we have better laws, and also can we be more cost effective as we go? And we've been trying to do...
Now you're singing my tune. Now, just to be certain that you guys, as professionals, have an adversarial relationship. Your job is basically to prosecute somebody in front of a judge. Your job is, everyone has a lawyer, and if you can't afford one will be appointed to you.
Correct.
You're that guy.
Yes.
And so you guys are working from different angles here.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, but I think there's the commission, CCJJ, has shown us some common ground. That
CCJJ...
Colorado Criminal and Juvenile Justice Commission.
You see, you're in a commission so long, the bureaucracy just...
I usually do the eye roll too when I say that. That commission, I think, has, Don and I, we were talking before, it's brought people together that can actually sit and have discussions over a longer period of time than the hallway anecdotal, this is why we need legislation, this is why we shouldn't have legislation.
Because traditionally, you might be in that hallway outside of the committee room in the Capitol whispering to a politician, hey, we need to get this thing done. Or you might be whispering in the other direction, and then it kind of gets mixed out in the middle of a fight of a committee of people who haven't really studied it long enough.
Right.
And let me see if I understand this part. So this commission was set up several years ago by the state legislature so that you guys could start hammering it out on some issues to see on criminal justice, sentencing reform, what type of laws should be a felony and misdemeanor, that kind of stuff, and then present back to them. So talk to me. This I would think would be rather adversarial to get judges, lawyers, defenders, victims advocates all in the same room.
I was probably one of the worst offenders at the early stages because then we all got the same lecture, which is leave your agenda at the door.
How can you do that?
Well, it's tough
I can't
to do.
that.
I understand. It's tough to do, and I certainly don't do it all the time. But it's become clear that we can come to some agreement in some areas. Now, I think we're getting into some tougher areas. We'll see where we are. I hate the low-hanging fruit, but we've done a lot of good things, but it's not been huge sentencing reform. We did stuff on drugs, but we haven't touched big sentences yet. And we'll see. But I think we have, over the last 3 or 4 years, done a pretty good job at leaving that agenda behind.
And this works in a way that if you guys vote on something, does the whole group then support it, even the guys who hated it?
Sure. And if the group supports it, sometimes we get our way, sometimes we don't. But if the group supports it, we don't go down and submarine it if we were the minority in the room on the initial vote. We understand that vetting out, and it's not just whispering in the hallway, John, it's also our testimony. Doug would go in and testify on a bill, and I go in and testify on a bill. We give our 180-degree differences, and there's never a dialogue in that setting in a legislative hearing, Doug and I talking about why we have these different perspectives. And so I think what the legislature does has a process, but I think that the commission has a better ability to go into details. And it's not just lessening sentences. I'll give you an example. We dropped sentences for small possessions of certain drugs, but we also increased minimum sentences for repeat drug drivers. We also increased penalties for date rape drugs. And so, because we saw those drugs have a bigger impact on public safety, and the possession of small drugs, really, if we can get at it through treatment, it's better cost effectiveness. So it's not all in one direction. We try to take that. And I got to tell you, Doug and I, before the commission, would have never been able to sit in a room and say we're going to raise certain penalties or lower certain penalties. The commission is a vehicle to do that. And it's not perfect, but it's a good vehicle for people that have different backgrounds but have good information.
So from all three of our point of view, I want to save money because I want to cut the budget deficit without raising taxes. That's my major goal. Your major goal is safety. You're out there to make sure that bad guys are put away. Your goal is to make sure that guys who are accused get the best representation and that good guys don't get caught up in the bureaucracy. And so, it's amazing that it's taken this long to sit down at a table and start working some of these things out. Am I right to say that our sentencing laws are a little odd? Let me bring over here first.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And, in 85, we just sort of doubled all of our sentences.
That's kind of back in the Reagan, 3 strikes, you're out, let's be tough on crime.
Exactly, and it was just double without any real evidence to support that doubling the sentences would cut down on people doing bad things when they got out. And it's driven up our Department of Corrections budget. I mean, we're at $750 million now. And we have watched new crimes get past sort of what we're calling boutique crimes. We have a theft statute, for instance, that covers a multitude of things, but we have theft of newspapers, we have theft of farm equipment, we have theft of ski
So in other words, we have laws for all those instead of just one generic theft law.
And so our criminal laws have expanded as a result of the legislative process to cover one little area that a constituent may come in and
Would a good
complain.
example be that you cannot drive while being distracted, but last year or the year before, I forget, they passed a law that you can't text and drive.
Correct.
It's not a law that says you can't do Sudoku and drive or do the New York Times crossword puzzle and drive, but that's distracted
Put
driving.
your makeup on.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but so we had to carve this out. It's usually done because of either a constituent has been harmed by it, or we want to make a statement and do something educational. But really, it just ends up cluttering things up, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, if you try to, and we're in the business for over 2 decades, both of us, and when you do a sentencing, one of the biggest reasons a case gets reversed is because there's been an error on the sentencing, because it's like a Japanese stereo instruction or me trying to build my kid's bicycle on Christmas morning. It is very confusing. Right now, I think for secondary assault, which means either assault with a deadly weapon or serious bodily injury, there are 20 different variations that apply to that crime alone that will end you up in 20 different places on a possible sentencing range. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is make that so it's clear to everybody we don't have mistakes, but as we're doing it, also look at equities. For example, if you go from a Class 3 felony to a Class 4 felony on a violent crime, you probably want a much larger range to be able to bump it up. But when it comes to a drug offense and it's because of the volume or some other issue, you really don't need to have 10 or 20 years in that range for a higher drug offense. And so we're also looking, as we examine these sentencing laws, not only to make them clearer so there's certainty, but also to make them fair and equitable as you look at different sex offenses versus property crimes versus drug offenses.
Well, like this year, you guys did something on sex offenses. Now, this is, you talk about the hot potato of all hot potatoes, because any constituent who hears sex offender, they want to come down like an anvil, and I do too. That makes sense. But I live in Boulder. Now, Boulder's a goofy place, and we do some stupid things, but one of the great traditions we've had over the years, including the mall crawl and kinetics and Alfred Packard days and all that other silliness, we have something called the Naked Pumpkin Run. And on Halloween, people put pumpkins on like helmets, run down the Pearl Street Mall naked, and it's good, stupid fun after bedtime for the kids. A couple of years ago, they were arrested for this. And if they were charged with, they would have gone down as sex criminals on a sex offender registry for the rest of their lives. And this is good stuff. I mean, but then that to me doesn't seem like a sex crime, or am I wrong?
Well, I don't think it's a sex crime, but
he's not answering the question whether he's actually done it before.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's
like with a melon on your head. You look a lot more familiar.
But No, John, you're absolutely right. I mean, the sex offenses were like the hot crime a few years ago. Hot, not as in good, but hot as in that's what got all the legislative attention. And we just decided that we were going to make them, very draconian, and everything was going to fall into basically two categories in the felony world: to life or 10 to life,
Right.
and the registration in it. And the absurdity, I think, was emphasized from a bill that CCJJ passed, I think, last year, where if you were urinating in public, you were in a bar, you're drunk, you went out in the alley, you had to register.
As a sex offender.
But if you masturbated in public, you did not.
And so we addressed that.
Well, wait. Oh, darn.
But we cleaned. But that's just because.
All right, so now
it
if
got
somebody
piecemeal.
urinates in public, does a Billy
Yes.
Carter, for those of you old enough to remember, that's not a sex crime. You guys put this forward,
No,
was it this year?
We didn't.
We cleaned it up.
We cleaned it up.
Right.
But
right,
that's
what I mean.
an example
So
of.
right now is taking a leak outside after the ball game or in the dark when you can't find a place to go.
Right.
And then the older I get and the more I'm feeling my prostate, I'm starting to worry about this.
But we're not encouraging it, just so
I'm
you
not
know.
even saying we're encouraging it. I'm saying, is it a sex crime?
It isn't, and that's what we talked about. And once again, that would have been a tough, difficult decision to have purely either in a hearing room or in a hallway. It's a lot easier.
And that passed this year, is that correct?
Last year.
Last year.
It's a lot easier for a legislator to come in and say, on a sex crime, I've got all the DAs and
All the
defense
prosecutors.
and we all agree at that, and we vetted that out. So, and the thing that I think is really important also to look at, John, is that the things that we're doing, and right now we've got a lull. In fact, we've gone down a little bit on prison entries over the last 2 years. So we have this eye of a storm, I think, the hurricane, and we got a breath and we can take. And so what can we do while we're not building more prison beds and we actually have a flat needing DOC for a while? What can we do so in case the population increases or the demographics change again and we go up again, we're in a shape not just have the double in the prison population.
A couple things. So
Yep.
to be clear, it's still not a sex crime to masturbate in public.
No, it is now.
Yeah.
But you can pee all you want.
I can be all I want.
Right,
Terrific. Getting back to the point you just made, for the last couple of decades, our prison population skyrocketed. Our Department of Corrections budget went from like 3% of the budget to over 9% of
Yes.
the budget. And a lot of it because of the repetitive laws and drug offenses that really shouldn't have been.
And mandatory sentencing.
Mandatory sentences. You're telling me.
And I would disagree with that to a certain extent,
Okay.
but we can handle that another time.
But you're telling me, thanks to you guys working together, that has at least leveled off right now. We're not putting as many people behind bars. Is that the right way to put it? You gotta be careful.
I wouldn't. Well, as an elected official, you love to take credit for stuff.
Right.
But
Yeah, I'm
I
not
don't
sure we
think-
can take credit for all of that.
Nationally, crime has flattened out. And in fact, there's been a decrease in certain areas, and there's numerous factors on that. But
Population's getting old, and we.
that's part of it. That's part of it. And so what we have here is a chance in Colorado. We were doubling our prison population every 9 years. It went from 4,000 in the mid-'80s to 9,000, mid-'90s to 18,000, and now it's around 22, 23,000, and it's leveled off there. And so we have a chance to try to divert some resources, because that's what we know what we want to do. For instance, prison reentry. We made some recommendations in 2008. We haven't been able to implement those to the degree, and they're basic, John. Give the guy housing when he gets out of prison, give him education or job skills, and have treatment for his issues, whether it's substance abuse or mental health issues or a combination. You do those three
And you're
things.
telling me, as an evil, nasty conservative that's
Yes.
heartless, you're telling me that helping somebody after they get out of prison, helping them make sure they have housing, make sure that they've got some job skills, can get a job, if they're
And
stuck
treatment.
and if they're stuck on drugs, to help them with that. You're telling me that I can say that's going to cost us less.
You ought to be ecstatic about this, because 40% of our prison beds are taken up by guys who screw up on parole and come back to prison. Okay, and there are states we have about a 50% recidivism rate that cut that in half. So if you can imagine, you could cut 20% of the DOC population budget if you're able to reduce recidivism and you reinvest those dollars. So not only is it good to you as a dollar investment, John, but as somebody who's concerned about public safety, the best thing a crime victim wants is not to be a victim in the first place. And so if you're able to do like other states have done and cut those prison reentries, do a better job on recidivism.
I don't know. It sounds like you're getting soft to me.
But that's when we were talking about public safety, and I have a gun. Well, that's what I'm saying. Is public safety is not just defending yourself.
Enforcement.
It's right. It's the jobs. We know that the first 6 months when somebody comes out is the most critical stage when they come out of prison. they don't have employment, which
After, let's make it clear, after they've done their time.
Yes.
So in other words, they've paid their debt to society, they're free and clear, but if you just kick them out like in the Blues Brothers, you open the door and kick them out.
Or a bus ticket sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah, a bus ticket and a new suit.
No, we give them $100 and
Yeah.
a bus ticket. That's the $100 has been on the books for 30 years, and they walk out with no job, and they have a felony conviction. So
They're not
getting
gonna get a
employed is
job.
tough. They don't have. They get, if they have mental health issues, they get 30 days worth of meds, and then we dump them on the community mental health centers, and they don't really have any employability skills because we haven't done, and it's not DOC's fault, that there's just no money to do that. And so what we see when Don talks about 40% inside for screwing up, it's not they're committing new crimes. They can't make it through parole because they can't get a
So you're
job,
telling me
they
that
can't work.
we can save money by
Yes.
helping them out.
Yes.
Which means when I hear we need more money, well, wait a second, if we do this, we can save that money. So it pays for itself.
$32,000 a year average to keep somebody inside. It's about a third of that to work with them on the street.
But they are, and I disagree a little bit with Doug, it's a combination of technical violations on parole and new offenses. But John, look at a program, they do a limited number because they can't afford a Department of Corrections on heavy equipment operation training. Those guys that are able to get that while they're in DOC have one of the lowest recidivism rates when they re-enter. Why? Because they can actually get paying jobs. So that's one thing that we have to look at is it's tough to change resources, but we need is, if we have a chance to move resources purely from locking somebody up to programs while they're in so that you can reduce that recidivism rate. I think that's going to be the secret of getting resources to go with what we want to do when it comes to the justice system, not just warehouse. It's that shifting of resources that's very challenging.
I mean, talk about a few of the other successes, failures this year, because I mean, this process, and trust me, I don't like bureaucratic processes. The idea of, well, let's get a bunch of guys who work for government and around it to get together, usually just implodes or just creates more government. This one seems to be cleaning up some problems and some slop in the system. There was what was it, a fiscal note reporting bill that, you were talking about those little bills that pop up, the no texting. It's like, well, that's already covered. Why do we keep making new laws?
Right. I mean, I think,
and tell me about this that you guys recommended and it passed. What does it do?
Yeah, it's Representative Nichols' bill and Senator Roberts' bill, and I personally think it's one of the most important bills that came out of our
What does it do?
commission. It basically says when a legislature wants to introduce legislation, we will look at it from a bipartisan perspective, and without going through the whole bill, it's, do we need this new law? Do we need this new crime? Do we need this change in sentence? Do we need the increase in sentence? Do we need the decrease in sentence? And so instead
actually,
of Don and I,
put a fiscal note on if we make this law. I'm beating up on texting and driving, but if we do that, it's going to cost us in enforcement this much money.
we already do the fiscal note process. What this adds to it is, here are the other criminal offenses that will cover this particular type of offense. So do we need a new bill? Do we need a new law? Do we need to make this change?
Okay, let me kick it back to you then, see if I've got this right. So going back to the texting while driving, which of course I never. That if you would say, wait a second, we already have these 3 other laws
Careless
that
or
cover
reckless.
this.
Yeah.
And those, I mean, so there'd
Careless driving, reckless driving, one of those things.
right, distracted while driving, anything else.
But that's an interesting thing, though, John. I tell you, as a prosecutor, there are so many, especially young people, that are texting and is really dangerous. I don't know if you do that through prevention or training or enforcement, but that's a perfect example. You're going to have a lot of people, and I've had them in my community, who died because of texting, and they're going to say, I want a texting while driving bill because I want to prevent those kids from hurting somebody else or hurting themselves. So that would be an interesting one to put through the prism of that bill. I think it was 1269, saying, how do you justify that bill, both in the sense of justice and in the sense of cost efficiency?
But now at least lawmakers can't just bring out the victim of the latest crime, create a new bill in his or her name or new law, and clutter up the books. We have to say, well, that's a good and wonderful thing, but it's already covered.
Right. What I think it stops on both sides is I run in with my one anecdotal story about how horrific it was that Don Quick charged my guy, and he doesn't come in and bring this one victim in to say how horrific it was. Now, it may still happen, but the lawmaker for the first time has in front of them an analysis from a bipartisan agency to say, here's everything else that covers this. do you still want to go through with this?
And if there's nothing that covers that,
Different story.
Then we say, is this worth a new law?
Yes.
There was another one that you guys worked on, which was great talk show fodder.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. Was the idea of we have drinking and driving laws, certain levels. You guys came up with recommendations for marijuana levels and driving. Which, by the way, if you need some help studying that, I know lots of guys that can help you. But you came up with a level that would be the equivalent of being drunk while driving, except on pot.
There's DUI per se already with alcohol, and this was looking at doing a DUI per se when it comes to levels of marijuana. The marijuana
Is this becoming a growing problem? Is that why?
Yes. I mean, and the marijuana now is much more potent. In the 70s, the THC content was 3 to 7%. Now we're looking at THC content between 20 and 30%. I hardly ever get a hash case because you don't need to concentrate it. It already has such a high THC level. So it was down as looking at what the other states and what the other countries do and having a DUI per se law such that if you're at this level, then that is going to be driving under the influence when it comes to marijuana.
But how do you know, I mean, just stupidly here, how do you know what the right level is for something that's not legal to test and find out what that is?
Well, how many states? There's other states that have done it. So we've talked to, there was our state toxicologist looked at with reports, and where we came in was a level of 5 nanograms. And actually that's one of the highest along in the United States in the sense that other states go from 0 to 3 and some go up to 4. So
nanograms?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I again, it's no secret, I did not, as a commission member, I voted against the bill because I was not convinced that we could just pick a number. And I think the research sort of goes both ways. What's the number? Number one, is it 5 nanograms? Is it 8? Is it 4? Is it? I mean, there's one state I think that has zero tolerance. Zero tolerance. You get, and pot stays in the system a long time.
Right.
You
I mean, one of my
joint
arguments
2
is
months ago, and it's still in your system.
But that's a red herring, guys. Is that they only test the active THC, not the metabolized THC, and that has a shelf life, and the toxicologists agree about 4 hours. So you're not testing whether it's metabolized in your fat cells. You're testing at that level the blood to see how much of the active THC
so
is in your
let's
bloodstream.
take a guy who's on the medical marijuana registry.
That's a different issue.
And let's take one of the 5 guys who are actually on it for medical purposes, not recreational purposes. And so he uses it pretty regularly.
Sure.
And then you pull him over. He's fine to drive, but he's been smoking. He smokes a little every day, so it's going to show up in his system.
But he's not, John. He's being treated just like the guy that had his teeth taken out maybe on Percocet, and he's told, okay, you should take Percocet for your pain, but if you're taking Percocet, you can be charged with driving under the influence of prescription drugs. We have those all the time where people are charged with it. So the answer is, it isn't like the guy that also said I do better on alcohol driving. We heard that at the testimony too.
Hey man, that is true. I am telling you.
So talk to the toxicologist, the folks at CU Health Sciences or Denver General, and they'll talk to you about that. And that's a growing problem. We have 125,000 people now on the registry compared to 2,000 2 years ago. And
but your commission came up with a recommendation, and you had a problem with it because of the levels, but you guys went forward and it died, if I recall. Why did it die when you brought it to the legislature?
Well, to begin with, the commission's support got pulled because there was a significant portion of the bill, I thought it was significant, which was requiring suspension of license, your driver's license, the administrative part, and that was pulled for fiscal note reasons, that it was going to cost too much money to do it.
to get people's licenses.
So,
So in other words, basically from a 30,000-foot view, you guys put together what you thought was a good bill. You all agreed on it through your process. Not that you all agreed, but you voted it out.
Yes.
You brought it to the legislature, and the sausage-making factory that it is, it started getting changed to the
Yes.
point where you had to yank it out.
well,
Or your
I voted to
organization.
pull CCJJ support because, and without going through the whole thought process on that, I thought it was a substantive enough change that it could no longer be a CCJJ bill. And so that support got pulled because of that they peeled off the administrative
All right, to
side.
bring it back to the beginning of this conversation, now that you guys have said you got a lot of the low-hanging fruit of what you guys can agree on, now it's going to get tougher and tougher. A bill like this is, you're really going to start talking about things where you have larger disagreements, correct?
Yes, but I'm hopeful that we had the kind of process we're still able to do the things we wanted to do, like we did the first 3 or 4 years, where we still try to find areas of consensus or areas at least of compromise that we can both live with. I don't want the commission bills to all of a sudden have two political processes. I don't have time to do that, John. I don't have time to spend five months working it out with Doug and the others, and then to say, okay, now it goes over across the street and it's a free-for-all in politics on it. If someone accepts that bill as a CCJJ bill, that should go through saying, I support what they did for 6 months, and this is how it needs to be. And that has to be supported by all of us.
So is the problem or the challenges you see coming up, we've only got a few minutes left, but is the challenge you see for this collaborative effort that now that you're getting to stuff that is going to be a little tougher, a little more controversial, that when you come up with an answer, agree on it, and kick it over to the legislature, they're going to be less likely to keep it intact the way you recommended?
I think we're going to figure that out next year.
Oh, what an elected official's response.
Some are more worried about it than others, I guess.
I am worried about
too.
it. I think that I too believe that the process that we've gone through, is it fast enough for me? No. Have we done a really good job? I mean, we submitted, I think, nine of our recommendations went to bill, 7 were passed this year. That's pretty good in the legislative process.
That's more than pretty good. That's incredible.
My concern is when we get to the tougher stuff, when we really start talking about sex offenses and violent crimes and minimum mandatory sentences.
And drug laws and
drugs. Actually,
we're doing. I mean,
separated dealers from possession, and we've made progress.
And also, but the sentencing reform of, I know there's talk about having one schedule for drug users and another one for felons.
And I'm not sure that's going to be as big a fight as you would expect. But I think the fight, the disagreement is going to be on what's the right sentence for a violent crime?
And mandatory minimums.
What's the right sentence? Right. What's a mandatory minimum? And should we have those or should we not have them?
I mean, this process has been really good for the budget. It's been good for the victims. I think it's been good for those people who are going through the system. So please keep it up, and I hope it works. And the fun stuff is to come. Thank you. And by the way, I'll be calling you next time I get arrested. Okay. Thank you, and I'll be bribing you next time. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute. Check us out online, independenceinstitute.org. We'll see you next week.